the tricky bit is that if we start to be the ones who are advocating more so for living, the danger in their ambivalence is that the client or patient will then start being the ones who advocate for dying. And that's the power struggle, really, that I think you're referring to there. And one of the sayings in MI is, I know what I believe when I hear myself speak.
Welcome to Protect, Suicide Prevention Training Podcast for healthcare professionals. I'm Manan, consultant psychiatrist, founder, and head of faculty at Progress Guide. Good morning, good evening, good day to all our listeners. It's a real pleasure today to invite Dr. Stan Steindl, author, educator, teacher, researcher, consultant psychologist, and I can see guitars in the background, so most probably a guitarist, music enthusiast. I've also heard a dog lover, surfer, father, so lots to kind of talk about. But the reason we have got Stan on the show today is that in the week that's just gone, I attended one of his workshops on motivational interviewing. It was an advanced workshop. I'd done a foundational one a couple of months back. And I can say it was absolutely awesome. And we were just starting the conversation, and I was telling Stan that it was the highlight of my week. It's experiential, interactive, really intuitive. And Stan kind of brings to life some of those core skills of connecting with people, which is so central to the suicide prevention work that we're interested in. And we got chatting during the course, and Stan very kindly agreed to come and join us on the podcast. So welcome, Stan.
Well, hello, Manan, and hello, everyone. Yes, what a lovely introduction. You've really covered sort of my whole life in one little paragraph. So yes, that's really great. But I'm delighted to be here and very keen to kind of chat with you, maybe even kind of back and forth a little bit about MI and how it really applies to some of the work that you might be doing. It'll be great.
So Stan's clearly, at least here in Australia and internationally as well, and one can think of Stan as an MI guru. And the other interest of his is compassion-focused therapy. He brings together some of those core themes of empathy and connection in the work that he does. And I've been listening to some of his videos on YouTube, and the way he kind of synthesizes these two streams of thinking is really wonderful. And I'll strongly recommend people should take a look at Stan's videos on YouTube. There are kind of short 5 to 10 minutes, really kind of skills focused, some of them on compassion, and that's a really good channel. So I will definitely recommend subscribing to that. I should have added YouTube influencer to that list of things that Stan
I think
does.
words like influencer and guru are probably beyond the scope. But no, it's such interesting stuff, and I think for me, in some ways, motivational interviewing is compassion in action. That's a way to be compassionate, is to really listen well, to help people to explore their own sort of arguments for and against change, to think it through and think more deeply about what this might mean for them, and then to come to some sort of conclusion about what to do next. I think that is compassionate action, and then of course, on the flip side, compassion is a motivation. And so I think MI has a lot to bring to compassion and compassion-focused therapy. And because sometimes we have little fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion and self-compassion, of course. That's the other important flow. And so that sometimes we can feel ambivalent or feel at least two ways about compassion as well. And so MI can help with that. So yeah, would be delighted to explore that and explore the way that these two kind of work together, really, motivational interviewing and compassion-focused therapy.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's something which is so relevant to people in suicidal distress, because often they have a really harsh voice in their head. And which is not just telling them about life is worth living, it also often is telling them that you do not deserve to be living, you know? And how do you bring compassion into that conversation without it sounding patronizing or self-pity? That's actually quite a nuanced skill. And one of the things that listening to your kind of some of the podcasts, some of the YouTube videos, it kind of struck me around the role of listening, and you kind of hammer that in your training quite a bit, isn't it? Some really interesting exercises you took us through, where it started with a minute and a half of listening, and then 2 minutes and 2.5, and building in those MI skills. I thought that was brilliant. Could you perhaps expand on that a little bit? You know, this idea of kind of listening to understand, you often say, not just to respond. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
So really, I think, sort of listening well is the key. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And so we're really wanting to be doing more listening than telling. And a lot of health practitioners, I mean, this is a core skill, isn't it, really, to listen to clients, but it can actually be quite useful sometimes to stop and kind of break down the components of listening well. What is it to really listen well and to understand and really to help the person feel understood? So yes, we did those little series of exercises. The first bit was about practicing a quiet presence, an attentiveness, silence inside and out, not making necessarily any sounds with the mouth, but just listening, using eye contact, listening with your ears, your eyes, your heart, and trying to really kind of connect and create an empathic bridge with the person without necessarily saying anything. And it really was quite sort of powerful, moving sorts of feedback that we got, wasn't it, from the participants? Some people were saying that actually it was very moving when feeling deeply listened to, that actually the speaker was arriving at some very emotional and kind of poignant places, even just with that quiet presence from the listener. And so we want to remember that. We want to remember silence and attentiveness and that quiet presence. Sometimes even just holding back, saying that next thing, and instead leaving a little space, leaving a little bit of silence. But then, of course, we also need to get the ball rolling occasionally and help the person to start speaking about an area. And so we layer that up with open questions. We try to ask every now and then these open questions just to get the ball rolling. It was very interesting, though, when we did that exercise, because as some of the participants said, the moment you ask a question, then the person has to answer that question. So there's a guiding piece to it now, when we ask a question. So we're wanting to be very aware of that too. We want to ask questions that are very open and allow really, or invite the person to still speak about whatever they perhaps would like to or is important to them. But then sometimes we might quite intentionally ask a more directional question, something that creates direction in the conversation and really invites the person to speak about a particular thing. And so we have the quiet presence. We ask perhaps an open question. And then the third exercise we did, we added into that reflections, paraphrases. We often will start with a question, but then move into really just saying back to the person what they've said to us. I mean, in fact, simple reflections are like that, where the person might make a statement and we just really state that back to them, perhaps even in the same words. It's just a little signpost, a little signal to the person. Yep, I'm listening. I'm with you, I'm following along. But sometimes we use more complex reflections as well. And this is probably a really important skill, I think, is this ability to use complex reflections where we actually listen in a way that we identify what might this person be really feeling? What might they be meaning in and around and amongst what they're saying? What might be the feelings and the meanings there? And then we try to kind of reflect those as well. And that then serves to deepen the conversation. The feedback, I think, from participants there was that questions can really help the speaker feel like the listener is interested and curious and even listening. But these reflections, and especially the complex reflections, that helps the speaker to really feel understood. And that's what listening well is about, I think. It's about us understanding the person and perhaps what they're saying and feeling and meaning. But it's also that the person feels understood. And then we get into a kind of a rhythm and flow and we can take it from there. So yeah, I guess that's what I'm thinking when I'm sort of, thinking about really trying to listen well.
Yeah. I love that phrase, quiet presence. I really like that. And Protect, we try to kind of hammer on about that kind of mind open, mouth shut. Like if you want to pontificate, go and write a blog, in the core values of Protect, we talk about the courage to hold back. And I've heard you say, I think it was in the foundation course that you mentioned the bit around sometimes it's important to just get out of the way so that the person can make the change. Don't stand in the way of that change. And sometimes it takes a lot of courage to be able to do that, because as healthcare professionals, our natural temptation is to jump in and help and give advice. And as you mentioned in the course, MI isn't averse to kind of giving advice or sharing information, but there is a way in which it is done, which is collaborative and kind of in partnership, almost taking permission before you kind of share that information. So as not to activate that resistance. But I love that phrase, quiet presence. We kind of talk about listening with fascination. Someone is talking about their crisis, about something that is deeply distressing for them. And it's a real privilege to be sharing that moment with that person and they're opening up to you. Just keep your mouth shut and listen for a while, Yes.
No, I think that's really interesting. You've got some great turns of phrase there to describe this piece. And it does take a lot of courage and strength and presence of mind. I mean, I think that's the other big piece there is just the clinician having that self-awareness really and becoming very intentional in the things that we do, that we're choosing to remain quiet sometimes. And at other times with intention, we ask a question or we offer a reflection so that it's not just an autopilot thing anymore. It's really, it's the courage, the strength, the intention. I love fascination or curiosity, but it's really that intentional, purposeful kind of listening. I think we get tripped up a little bit by our enthusiasm. Like we really want to be helpful. And so we're like, I know what you can do. Maybe you can blah, blah, blah. And of course, sometimes the client says, well, yeah, but I've tried that and, blah, blah, blah. So you're sort of like, okay. So yes, we get sort of tripped up by our enthusiasm to problem solve or to offer some suggestions or solutions. And actually that was mentioned a couple of times in the workshop as well, wasn't it? Just that awareness some people there had of just this urge bubbling up inside them to suggest, a solution. And actually, like you say, we can absolutely offer suggestions, recommendations, advice even, or share some information. The way I always sort of feel about it is we can actually do that anytime. And so if we just pause now, just hold that, put a pin in that, and just sort of keep listening and keep inquiring and keep reflecting, we can sort of see, might we find a way that actually the client or patient can tell us that bit of information? Is it in there for them? Because people are much more persuaded or convinced by things that they say. And so if we just hold off on the advice, keep listening, maybe they might say it. And if they don't, well, later on, we can still offer that advice. We can still provide that information with permission, as you say. But yeah, I think that's good stuff.
Gosh, there was so much in there, and I'd like to pick up some of those things. I don't want to forget them, so I want to go back to that. Yeah, but, and you kind of did that in the foundation course and in the advanced course as well. I shared a reflection, and you kind of reminded me, the bit after the but doesn't really count, and how to replace that with and. We'll like to come back to that.
Yes.
But I just wanted to get your opinion on the body language and the nonverbal cues. And lately, I've found myself in the suicide prevention training courses that we run. I grew up reading books from Alan Pease. I've actually recently connected with him on LinkedIn. He's still out there. And I texted him saying, "Are you still writing?" He said, "No, I'm shooting videos nowadays." And he told me about a studio that he owns somewhere around Noosa. So, amazing. So lately I've been telling people that, look, if you're listening, you don't have to show that you're listening. And you kind of talk about listening with your heart, like listening with your heart. And to me, that kind of captures the essence of what we're trying to say. The 40-degree head tilt or the lean forward and the nods. If you are listening with your heart, that will happen automatically. You then don't have to think about kind of your body language, so making that genuine attempt with curiosity to listen or listening with fascination. Do you have a take on that, like the body language? Because I know that as a young psychiatrist, we were told a lot of these things, open palms, your hands are closed, close up, or move forward, just show that. So these were things that were taught. But lately I've been telling people, no, actually, just listen. The body language will follow. If you're not listening and you've got thinking about the next patient and the bleeps going off and stuff like that, a lot of people present in suicidal distress in the emergency department and they're inherently busy places. It's very difficult to kind of stay mindful because your mind wanders off to the next patient or the notes that haven't been written up or or other sounds and noises. It takes a lot of practice actually to mindfully bring yourself back to the patient story and what the person is sharing with you. And when your mind gets distracted, doesn't matter how much practice of body language you have. I've found that people know that you are distracted and you're not listening. Doesn't matter whether you have a lean forward and you're heading you're kind of nodding your head or not. People know you have stopped listening. That's been my experience. Do you have a view or an opinion about body language?
I feel like it's a little bit of both. So on the one hand, I absolutely agree with you. Like when you're really listening and connecting with the person, especially when you're using reflective listening, because reflections really make you listen. And so if you know that you're about to reflect or paraphrase what the person has just said, the only place you can get that is by listening to what they say. And actually that's one of the things about questions sometimes is questions can take you away from listening. You're thinking about what your next question might be. And so, not perhaps quite as tuned in to listening. So I do agree that when we are listening well, especially with reflective listening, often that comes across to the person. They can sense it, they can feel it, they can sort of notice it in the very natural nonverbals that emerge from that. I also think that bringing awareness to the nonverbals can be helpful too in a couple of ways. One is that even when we're listening, we can have certain judgments or we can have unconscious biases, or we might feel certain aspects of our own inner threat system activated, or those sorts of things. And so when we're listening, those can emerge as well. And so clients and patients can kind of pick up on that too. So they can sort of see the raised eyebrow or the slight change in the tone of voice that's coming because we're really listening. It's just that there's also other little processes bubbling away in the back of our mind. So bringing awareness to the nonverbals and kind of really trying to work with them is important in that way. The other way I think that it can be important too is we can we can lead with the body. So if we're noticing the beeper going off and the noise outside the room and the thoughts of the other patient that we've just seen and our concerns about them, if we notice those are sort of there, sometimes a shift in the body, a lean forward, a sort of an intention to make good eye contact, a sort of a nod or a minimal encourager, or even a reflection. You know, like if we lead with the body, then that can bring the listening back in, and we start to kind of move back into listening well in that way as well. So I feel like it's a bit of both. I really feel like when you're truly listening, yes, absolutely, it shows, it's present, but it's tricky, and there can be things that sort of in various ways take us away from that. And so awareness of body language can sort of help and bring us back. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
And I don't think there are any right or wrong answers. You know, there are certain things and you talked in the course about kind of looking at a mirror and kind of seeing, you mentioned something in the course regarding that, looking at a mirror and seeing your reactions to your own face when you kind of push your eyebrow up, or, what kind of reaction it brings out. So that was quite interesting.
Well, I mean, I had a fascinating example recently where I was referred a new patient, their psychologist was going on maternity leave. And so that psychologist referred them to me as a sort of an alternative. And I saw the person on one occasion and then didn't sort of see them again. And anyway, the other psychologist came back to work and the client went back to them. And the psychologist sort of mentioned, and she was sort of a bit kind of, sort of awkward to say, but she wanted to tell me, and it was useful. And that was that when he came in, I was sort of writing some notes and I was looking at him, over my glasses like this. I feel like I was doing my best listening at the time, but that little tell was enough for him to feel, no, it doesn't feel comfortable. I feel like there's judgment there, or that sort of thing. So I mean that just is a fun example where you just sort of it's hard to know sometimes, but these little things can make a big difference. So we want to. I didn't go home and gaze at myself in the mirror and do this or at that particular stage, but it is a useful thing to stop and think about. And I try to do differently with my glasses now. I try not to gaze at people over the top of the glasses because some people feel uncomfortable with that.
It's concerning for some. Like I remember I was many moons back, I think 2003 or 2004, I was a young trainee psychiatrist in Oxford, and I was doing my psychotherapy placement, and my consultant was Steve Pearce. Now, Steve he's a psychiatrist, he's an amazing psychotherapist. The most awful body posture. Like he was running a therapeutic community, and, I would spend a fair bit of time with the patient, and they would hardly tell me anything. And then Steve would come in and he would lean back and he would just stroke his beard and they would tell him everything. I think, what the hell is this about? What is it about Steve that people tell everything? And I am doing all the right things. And you can see he would lean backward with his leg kind of pulled out. And there was something about his presence, his demeanor that just pulled stuff out of people.
Yeah, actually, I think that raises another really important point about all of this, and that is when we still, as clinicians, we want to do all of this stuff and think about it all and whatever, but we also want to stay true to ourselves and our own style and be authentic with it. We don't have to be Steve. We can get some tips and whatever, and sort of learn as we watch. But also we still want to be our own version of what this really is. Because I think authenticity is another thing that our clients and patients can really pick up on. And if we're trying too hard, that can be a bit of a distancer as well.
Because he was clearly listening, even with awful body posture, and he would hardly speak because he was a psychodynamic psychotherapist. But every 15, 20 minutes when he would open his mouth, he would say something profound. And, it's the kind of wisdom talk that you talk about where he has connected all the dots and he will say something really kind of hard hitting, it will cut through all of the intellectualization to the heart of the problem, and he would just go through, if you're sitting and you just see that kind of layer upon layer of how the conversation deepens. Which is pretty amazing to see when you can be a fly on the wall and just observe. So in those kind of little experiential exercises that you did, you kind of really took us through listening, open questions, reflections, and then you kind of made us summarize as well. We kind of didn't cover affirmations, but those core MI skills of open questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries, you kind of made us we did those little exercises. And then in the afternoon, you kind of made us look about someone for who's low in confidence and someone for whom something is low in importance. And we did those kind of role plays in pairs, which was really good. And I was just wondering, in those conversations, and this is something for our listeners, we have sent a lot of people to our staff to Steve's workshops. We are trying to roll out something called 7 Safe Steps on our inpatient wards, and nurses are very time poor. And even in those exercises that we were running, I was actually doing one with one of my nurses, and within 30 seconds of she's trying to stick to the MI principles of asking evocative questions, she was very quickly going into, yes, but you can do this, and yes, but you can do that. Could you tell us a little bit more about how do you resist the temptation to jump in and say those kind of yes but statements? They come from a place of care and concern for the patient, particularly, people who are in suicidal distress. You can see how much anxiety it creates in the professional, but also for our time poor nurses on wards, when it's so much easier and quicker just to tell people what to do. Do you have any thoughts? Because I know I'm kind of going back to that listening partnership, because we've just finished the core module in our podcast series, and it finishes on that chapter on empathy in action. So that's why I'm kind of trying to hammer this point home as to how important it is and what would people do in that space.
Yeah. And it's a sort of a massive question, but just to sort of sort of brainstorm a few ideas. I mean, it begins really, doesn't it, with the client or the patient being ambivalent about something. That's the tricky bit, is they feel two ways about it. And so the temptation for the clinician is to try to offer certain arguments for one side of ambivalence. The change side, usually, the clinician is arguing for change or for some sort of action and so on. The problem is that oftentimes when the clinician argues for one side of the ambivalence, then the client or patient is going to argue back and argue for the other side of their ambivalence. And so we get caught in these conversations where the clinician is arguing for change and the client is arguing against change. And so, yes, we're really trying to sort of, roll with resistance is kind of a nice MI saying, because that's what resistance is. Resistance is when the client is now arguing against the clinician. That's the interpersonal kind of dynamic there. And we need to really step away from one side or other of the ambivalence to kind of free the person up to sort of explore all of that for themselves. Now, one of the things, though, that we know is that, usually when people are getting when there's a bit of resistance like that, or people aren't changing, it's not just that they're being difficult or, kind of they're a resistant client or something. Actually, it's an opportunity for us to think, what's behind that ambivalence? And so that's where we started to talk about confidence and importance for change. That's where that fits in. Is it that the barriers for this person are that they're not sure that they can make this change? They're not sure how to do it, or whether they can, or whether they're able. Their confidence is low. Or is it that they're not really sure that they need to? They're not convinced that it's important or necessary or those sorts of things. So those little exercises that we did in the workshop are really to sort of start to practice, exploring confidence, exploring importance, trying to work out, what might be the barrier there, and then making some more targeted inquiry. If we start to notice that actually it is low confidence, then we might ask confidence-related questions. We might ask ability-related questions. We might invite the person to explore a little bit about solutions, or perhaps what's worked before, or, other things that, other problem solving that they might come up with. So we sort of still listening, still asking questions and reflecting, but now in a more directional way, exploring confidence. Or then we might decide actually importance is the barrier. And so we sort of start to ask need-related questions. What makes this change perhaps important, or how important is it? Or what are your values? What are the things that are important to you? And how does that fit with this current behavior? And is there a discrepancy there? Or, how might certain change bring you closer to your values? And so we're still listening, but we're creating that sort of direction. Of course, you might then start to resolve some of the low importance, and the person starts to feel like, actually, yes, I probably do need to do this. And now they say, but I'm not sure whether I can. And so now we're back to confidence. But it's really just, that's the dance, I think, is to sort of explore in a sort of a listening way these different key dimensions of what might actually be behind the ambivalence. Now, that, just to another part of your question, that does take a lot of, kind of wherewithal from the clinician, not to jump in and sort of solve those little bits. Like if the ambivalence is about low confidence, what might come out of the clinician's mouth is, well, perhaps you could could is the ability word there. And then if the ambivalence is based around low importance, what might come out of the clinician's mouth then is, well, perhaps you should, and that's the need or importance word. And so we find ourselves, kind of offering these ideas. How to resist doing that, or how to just kind of hold off on offering these sort of suggestions, or slipping into a sort of telling. We actually call it the expert trap. That's the expert trap. When we fall in, as clinicians, we fall into this trap of feeling like we're the expert, we know what's best. These are good suggestions. Why aren't you listening? This is good stuff, and so on. But I think it's some of the real, sometimes we just find our own little ways to remind ourselves just to wait and to leave some space and to be, it's a question of patience, I think. I mean, I was doing it wasn't the foundations workshop that you attended, but another one. I was doing a role play at the front, and afterwards I was reflecting back because it was a person who wasn't saying much. And so the temptation then is to fill the gaps, and to sort of say stuff. But what I realized later was I was shifting and putting, sort of sitting on my hands. And, I realized later that this is just a little cue for myself, just hold on a moment, just sitting on my hands, just waiting, trying to be patient. There's little things like that, sometimes literally physical things that we do just to remind ourselves, just wait and see, keep listening. And the other thing that I do as well, which is a little bit more sort of coming from the compassion field, really, is just sort of imagine that I'm breathing in compassion for myself, helping myself just to slow and steady the body, slow down the mind, breathing in compassion for myself, and then kind of breathing out compassion for that person that I'm listening to. So it's this sort of giving and receiving compassion on the breath, just to try to kind of, just to sort of create that sense of patience. Because, of course, often the motive behind our urge to, kind of give suggestions and perhaps tell people what to do is our own threat system. We're starting to have a little bit of threat system activation, maybe a bit of anxiety. We're kind of worried or concerned for the person. And so a little bit of breathing in and out, compassion, is a way just to settle that threat system and create a bit of a sense of patience. But I think I would put it out there to people, find what works for you on that one and sort of have a think. What is it that you can do just to hold back the next suggestion? So yeah, there you go.
So we've been running this, actually we've just had the first round of training for 7 safe steps, which is kind of a sequence of 7 safety, resilience related conversations, which we want our nurses to kind of undertake when someone is on a ward, and we are training up our nurses in these conversations. And you see that all the time, what you just described there around the expert trap, because and we keep repeating, suspend the desire to help. I know it takes courage to suspend the desire to help and just listen. But your workshop was a great reminder of the power of listening. In the morning, we did the O skills, open questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries, and how you listen in order to make those reflections. And then in the afternoon, we went through the other acronym, the DAWN, the desire, the ability, the reasons, the need, and, the importance of reasoning. And, you kind of made that point about advanced MI is really about advanced listening. And if you're listening for those things, if, the eyes can't see what the mind doesn't know. So I strongly believe that. And for each of the practitioners, just to be aware of those kind of 4 groups of things which kind of hint at, importance or confidence, and listen out for that. And then respond accordingly in a meaningful fashion, being evocative. So that it was quite funny because I was working with a colleague and I said, because you had framed the workshop around the patient must have the best lines, the client must have the best lines. And I kind of said, oh, but that is a really good line. I wish I said it. I said it in a funny way. So, and you can see my colleague drop back into MI, partnership and evocative for 30 seconds, and then very quickly flip back into, because their desire to help is so great.
Yes.
And it's 30 years of practice for someone, like advice giving and information giving, and what you can do and what you could do and what you should do, as you said. So,
but the thing is that listening is helping. This is the interesting thing. It's not that we try to help or we listen. In some ways, listening is the biggest bang for your buck. You may remember I probably quoted, that Maya Angelou quote where she says, it's people don't remember what you tell them, or they don't even necessarily remember what you do for them. They remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And this is the gift that comes along with listening well, is the person feels heard and understood. They feel respected. They feel, kind of partnered, and they feel safe. And if the person, if through good listening, you can kind of create those sorts of feelings in the person, I mean, that's powerful stuff and very, very helpful. It changes things when the person starts to feel safe.
So I do want to pick up something, but I'll come back to that a little later on ambivalence, which is the ambivalence people in suicidal distress feel between a life of pain or suicide as pain relief. There's a very strong life force within ourselves to kind of preserve life and persevere and kind of stay away from pain. There's a very strong life force, but when someone's pushed to that extent where they feel that actually pain relief through suicide seems like a better option. And that does create a person who is torn between those reasons for living and reasons for dying. I do want to pick up on that, but I want to pick up on another balancing act before that, because we are talking about listening, and we are starting the assess module in Protect in these podcasts. And we often find that professionals have a very difficult balancing act, one in which they need to meet their need of eliciting information, collecting all the data, which will help them formulate, and the patient's need of feeling validated and feeling heard, what you said about how did it make me feel, right? Like that interaction. So there are these two competing needs that are there. The clinicians need to ask all the questions, which might fall into the expert trap, and the patient's need of feeling listened to. And you may not have the luxury of, repeat appointments. You may be seeing them, say, in the emergency department or A&E, where you are kind of interacting with them as a one-off. And you have to do a thorough assessment, because in your mind, you need to come to a decision about what is the risk? Will this person be able to manage their safety if they are on their own at home? So there is a decision point for you, which will. And do you have any suggestions about how you do this? Because in MI, although it uses the term interviewing, which can sound like an interrogation, but MI definitely steers away from that idea of that expert trap of asking questions after questions and listening. Do you have any suggestions about how clinicians might strike that balance between their need and the person's needs?
Yes, I've always thought it's interesting that it's called motivational interviewing, because nowadays, that does come along with a sort of a slightly different feel to what perhaps MI really is. It's less about interviewing and certainly not interrogation, but more like conversation. I mean, it might almost be called motivational conversations or something like that, but one little practical way to think about it, because those kind of questions need to be asked, and there are various, I'm guessing, sort of the system or the organizations that people work for, kind of require certain things to be done, I guess, and there is certain best practice things, which means that particular questions have to be asked and that sort of thing. So one of the little fun ways to think about it is what we call a motivational interviewing sandwich, which is where you begin with MI and you begin with especially the engagement process of MI, where we're mainly using good listening skills for the person to feel heard and understood and to reach this moment of engagement. So it might be that you're talking about the presenting problem, or even those feelings around suicide, or it might even be that you're just talking about how they got here or what their week's been like, or you might bring them in and they've been watching a TV show on their phone or something, and you just talk about that, or whatever it might be. But the idea is you listen in a way where at some point you kind of reflect or you summarize what they're saying and they go, yeah, that's it. Yep, that's right. That's how I feel. That's how I feel about that, or whatever. This little moment of engagement, and they give you this sense, okay, they're feeling understood. And then you might shift into the the sort of the questions or the task at hand. But you might, what's that?
The data collection, because
the data collection piece
as well as part of the assessment.
Yes, and you might just sort of say, look, one of the things we do here is we just ask a few specific questions and we just get a little bit of information from you. Would you mind if we just move into some of that more specific kind of question asking? So you're just doing this little getting permission. Yeah, you're just doing this little flag. And you're just asking permission to move into that. And then, and the person probably will say yes. I mean, usually they go, yeah, whatever. So off you go and you do the data collection. And then at some point you sort of say, so now that you're here, what would be some of the, what would you like to do with the time that we've got, say? And then you shift back into the MI and you start to be evocative, you start to explore ambivalence, you look at reasons, and you move back into an MI type conversation from there. And I find that works, quite well, really, because it does create the sort of feeling that we're after by bookending it with the MI, but it just allows, with permission, to get the data as well, or to provide the information or whatever it might be on that particular session.
So the MI sandwich. And I think that's quite a nice way to kind of meet both needs, the person's needs to feel validated and feel heard, and the clinician's need to collect the information at hand. Yeah, that's a really, really good suggestion, Stan. So thanks for that. So going back to ambivalence, which is kind of a large part of MI, and, even kind of small changes, and you kind of joke about your hypertension and exercise and kind of the reasons for and reasons against, and the battle every morning at 6 a.m. if you have to get up and do some exercise. So even for someone who's quite committed, there is an ongoing battle in terms of ambivalence, right? So I think you make that point very nicely in the courses that you run. Sort of translating that into someone with suicidal distress, and how do we avoid a power struggle? So we kind of try to create a narrative of pain, because it is psychological pain that the person is suffering from. And the person has come in to see you with life that is so unbearable that seeing suicide as the solution. And as the professional, we are morally obligated, we are legally obligated. You may think it's unethical. Professionals have all sorts of beliefs about suicide. And you kind of think about suicide as the problem. And there is a huge dissonance there between the person who thinks of it as a solution and the professional thinks of it as the problem. It's a solution that ends all solutions. Do you have any suggestions from MI or compassion about how to connect with compassion and avoid a power struggle? How do you kind of work through that ambivalence? Because the person is having an internal battle between reasons for living and reasons for dying. They're in front of you. So clearly there is a part of them which wants to live. They want help. But then there's that other part which feels life is just unbearable. Do you have any suggestions about how you kind of bring that to the forefront and make it okay to talk about and kind of in terms of MI terms, roll with that resistance?
Yes, and I really appreciate the work you do in this area and the work of your colleagues. I mean, this is very, very important stuff. And as you say, that people are arriving basically having some of the worst days of their life. I mean, this is the worst times of their life, and they're suffering greatly. And as clinicians, our hearts go out to them, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want them to die. We feel like, as you say, that's the end of other solutions at that point. And we sort of, the tricky bit is that if we start to be the ones who are advocating more so for living, the danger in their ambivalence is that the client or patient will then start being the ones who advocate for dying. And that's the power struggle, really, that I think you're referring to there. And one of the sayings in MI is, I know what I believe when I hear myself speak. And so that's what we're really kind of watching out for here, I think, is that, we're not wanting to sort of relate or interact with a client in a way that evokes from them, a whole lot of arguments against us. And therefore,
say a little bit more on that, because you have this beautiful yes but thing that you did in the foundation course, where you kind of showed us a conversation really up on screen.
Yes.
Where there were all these yes buts, both from the clinician and the patient. Could you say a little bit about that, how it might sound like?
Well, this is one of the red flags, isn't it? Really, when we hear the yes buts. Now, we might hear those out of the client's mouth first. I think the example I gave was the person saying, you really need to lose some weight and start exercising, or something like that. And of course, the client says, yeah, but I don't have time to exercise. I'm sort of, working till late and blah, blah, blah. And so that yes, but I think it is a very important sort of red flag to notice. It's only a very small couple of words, but it's a real indicator that we're slipping into the power struggle. And, I mean, if a clinician were to ever say, but you really sort of need to be here for your family. And then the client says, no, yeah, but I think my family would be better off without me, actually, the way I am. So that's the danger is the yes, but. Now, of course, the clinician does it too. The clinician might respond, sometimes you really feel like your family is worse off with, having you around. But time will pass and things might get better. Now, that's just a yes, but, in more words. Now, just to say, like, I'm sure, probably it wouldn't really sound like that. Clinicians probably don't do that. But I guess just for the sake of the idea, when we do a little reflection and then follow it with but, that's basically a version of a yes, but. And what but says in that instance is whatever I've just said doesn't count. Yeah. What I'm about to say is what counts. And that's where we start to, we're discounting our reflections. So that means we're kind of discounting their point of view. We're trying to privilege our point of view. And then the person will say, yeah, but I can't stand the pain. I can't wait the time. It's too, and then now we've got more yes buts. So that's the power struggle, I think, is the yes buts.
So I think for our listeners, it's really important to hammer home this point, because I think this is such I think it's one of the top tips we can give people who are working with suicidal distress, is to listen out for those yes buts, because the courage to hold that back and just be that quiet presence and just listen to them without engaging in that power struggle is such an important part of relational safety, because the fabric of relational safety begins to break down if you start engaging in that power struggle and those yes buts are happening. Yeah. And as you say, as part of the self-determination theory, whatever comes out through the patient's mouth, they are more convinced by what's coming out of their mouth than our mouth. And the more we push that, the more we are pushing them in that corner of making the case about this life is not worth living because it's just too full of pain at the moment. So listen out for yes buts. Yes. And if you kind of have, if yes part is a signal that you're getting a writing reflex. And the whole point of MI is that we want to bring out a self-writing reflex through evocation, right? That's the point you make quite a bit in your courses, that how do you kind of stop yourself from writing them and help the person engage in self-writing? Could you give an example of how the conversation could go another way where, the self-writing reflex comes out from the patient in suicidal distress rather than the professional having to kind of say, this is what you should be doing?
Well, I think it begins in equipoise. In other words, the clinician really just staying equally poised on both sides of this dilemma, not necessarily trying to move in one direction or another. And so sort of saying to the person, so tell me a bit about things at the moment. What's really going through your mind, one way or the other. But what are your thoughts at the moment about, sort of this life and living? And so it's a very neutral question, and the person might talk about either side, in terms of the living or the dying. And then we start to move into very reflective listening. In fact, we might even say, I can hear there that, there's a big part of you that really feels like dying is the solution. The pain is so great. These really are some of the worst days of your life. And it's almost, you feel kind of desperate to find a way of getting rid of the pain. So tell me more about that side of all of this for you. And so then you might actually just very, very genuinely explore and listen to the more suicidal side of the person's ambivalence. Now, of course, I'm assuming that in this moment with the person, they are safe and they're with you, and so all that's all there. But we just start to listen to that side, and we start to reflect. And it's not so much about it's not agreeing with the person or agreeing, yes, that's a good idea, but it really is about accepting and sort of validating that this is also a legitimate side of their ambivalence and what they're going through right now. So we might sort of say, so it sounds like from what you're saying there that when you look ahead, you just feel like there's no hope. There's nothing is going to go, right for you. Nothing has gone right, and nothing is going to. And this feels like the only way that you can sort of end all this suffering. So you might be doing very genuine reflections on that side. But then at some point along the way, especially when the person says, yeah, that's basically it, sort of thing. They give you a little clue that they're feeling heard and understood and validated on that side. At some point you say, again, very genuinely, very gently, not trying to rush to it, but you just sort of say, what about the other side for you? What are some of the things that you think about to do with living and with keeping living? What are some of the thoughts you've had there, or maybe even the things that feel like they would be reasons to keep living? And so now we're gently guiding to the other side of the ambivalence. We're not trying to convince them of anything. It's still a very open question. We use our reflective listening, but we move from equipoise, and now we've started to move to a slightly more guiding style where we try to explore in what we might call change talk, the person's, in this case, desire, ability, reason or need to live and to keep living and to find other ways to reduce the pain. And the person, might say, well, I know I said my family might be better off without me, but I just want to see how things turn out when they grow up. And boom, okay, now we're working with some change talk. Now we're working with that side, and we say, you love them so much, and you really would want to see, what happens for them? You know, how do they go with school or, you know, after school? And so tell me more about that little piece. You know, when you think about your kids and being there for their future, you know, what other things come to mind? And so it's just this process. It's very gentle, reflective process of helping the person now start to elaborate on the other side, on this side of living. And this is the dance. This is the thing, you know. And another colleague of mine sort of says, you know, people will keep banging on about something until they feel properly heard and understood about that thing. And that's what we're doing here. We're really wanting to help the person feel heard and understood about this suicidal ideation or even intention. And once they do feel heard, there's not much more to say on that side.
Yeah.
And so we can guide them to the other side.
Yeah. That was beautiful. And I think this podcast would be invaluable for all of those who are attending the 7 Safe Steps training, because we've kind of trained up our staff in motivational interviewing through your workshops to actually engage in that safety planning piece. And we are kind of putting MI at the heart of suicide prevention strategies. And you may be, as I said, morally opposed, ethically opposed, legally obliged. And you may say suicide is not an option. But what do you think is almost irrelevant, because for a person in such extreme psychological pain that they believe suicide to be the solution, yes, it is a very real solution in their mind. So how do you kind of let go of some of what you believe in and engage with that ambivalence that they feel and bring that up to the surface and develop that discrepancy that is there between, you know, the two sides? Those are some of the key skills in that work, because the reality is, once they are off the ward in the community, they are on their own. They have to have that intrinsic motivation to maintain their safety. So it's not so much on the ward. Yes, safety is important on the ward as well, but you're really preparing someone for the journey, the road ahead when they are back out in the community and they have to take responsibility for that. So you might convince them through in a power struggle that we will keep you safe and you will be safe and you should be safe. But actually, when they're out there in the community, even if they're being seen by a case manager once a week, of the 168 hours in a week, 167, they're on their own, right? So it is so important to be able to help them see, yes, there are both sides to the argument, and bring out give them the best lines.
This is where you know, listening can be so helpful, because imagine, you know, a person says that they say, you know I said that my kids would be better off without me, but I also just want to see what happens for them. You know, they've said that now. You know, they've said that now. And when they do leave and go back out to their natural environment, it percolates because it's come out of their own mouth, and they do start to think, well, there is that part of me that wants to see how the kids go. And so that's the power, I think, and the helpfulness of listening well is it evokes this kind of language from the client that then percolates, and they start to convince themselves about this change.
Brilliant. I can't believe an hour. We've been chatting for an hour, right? Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So we didn't get time today to actually talk about compassion. We talked about listening quite a bit, but maybe that's one for a future podcast, which we could focus on compassion-focused therapy and how those two kind of intersect. And this is absolute gold dust for our listeners. And you've written a book on compassion as well. Do you want to say something about the book?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, there is a book called The Gifts of Compassion: How to Understand and Overcome Suffering. And so it's actually more of a self-help, but also sort of therapy companion book is how I have pitched it. It comes along with a workbook as well. And so people can sort of, you know, if they're seeing a therapist, or they can do it on their own, just working through some of the core psychoeducational elements of compassion-focused therapy.
Yeah. And that book is available on Amazon.
Yes.
And from
available on
well.
Amazon.
I think
what's that one?
It's available through your website as well. Are there links to the book on the website?
There are links to the book on the website. But yeah, Amazon and all of those different online bookshops has it.
Yep, the Gifts of Compassion. And I think it's such an important part of healing as well. And I really do hope we can pick that up in a future podcast because, I thought we would try and cover both, but there's so much rich stuff coming out of you, Stan. Like it feels like a travesty to stop you and kind of try to move things on. But
get me talking about MI, and I just lose myself. I can talk all day about it,
and I think,
and I do quite often.
Which you do quite often. And, there's such great energy in your workshops, and the way you are kind of real walking, living, talking MI in action kind of thing, because those workshops are run on that MI principle, and you kind of go, and then you give a reflection on what someone has said. And I just absolutely love it, I must say. And I've attended a lot of workshops. I love learning, and your workshops are some of the best that I've ever attended. So I'm just
thank you very much.
To have been on one of these workshops.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining our podcast today. I'm hopeful that we would be able to welcome you to another one of our shows where we'll be able to talk about compassion, perhaps a little later on when we have gone a bit through the assessment module. In the next podcast episode, we'll be talking about attitudes to suicide and how important they are, because what Stan was saying today kind of really highlights it, that if you believe that suicide is just wrong, if that's what you believe, that can get in the way of you connecting with someone. And if you believe suicide should be a permissible act, then you may not take definitive action to save a life. So we'll be talking about attitudes to suicide, and you can see how your understanding and your awareness of your own beliefs or prejudices that you hold about suicide plays into the conversations that you have and the listening that you engage in. And MI, as kind of Stan was saying, is all about advanced listening. And often when we are listening, we begin to filter out stuff in line with our beliefs and prejudices. And in order to engage with the ambivalence and to roll with resistance, Stan beautifully made the point about listening to both sides of the conversation. And it begins with awareness of your own self, what your own beliefs are, which we'll pick up in the next podcast. So thank you for giving up your Saturday morning to our listeners. Really, really enjoyed the show. Thank you, Stan.
My pleasure. Thank you.